You're listening to the REI Clarity Podcast, the show that guides you from confusion to clarity and sets you on the path to financial freedom faster. Learn how to grow your portfolio the right way with your host, REI advisor and co-founder of Shine Insurance, Jeremy Goodrich.
Hey, this is Jeremy Goodrich, your host for the REI Clarity Podcast, and this episode digs deep into multifamily investing. Our guest today has done it. He started out by jumping in and really just saying, I am going to do this. I'm going to go the multifamily direction. He didn't even question his strategy at any point. And then he made some mistakes, had some successes, got the snowball rolling. And now he's at a point where he can turn around and help you as someone who's thinking about starting to do this with what you can do to succeed, how to avoid some of the pitfalls, and how to build a team. And in the past episodes, we've talked about building a team as, your service providers, your realtor, your property manager, your lawyer, your accountant, your insurance agent. But what he's talking about in this episode is how to build a team of investors together who buy properties and then run those properties and make money off of those properties, right? This is a team of investors together. And in the multifamily world, you really have to have a team, especially if you don't have any experience on your own yet. And he'll talk to you about how you can build that team, what role you can play for that team, and how to take the next steps after that. So our guest today has made it into multifamily investing, has made a fine living for himself through multifamily investing, and now is teaching and helping other folks do the same. So without further ado, here is my interview with Jerome Myers. I want to start off with life before the leap. A lot of folks kind of put this together slowly, have a couple of single family rentals, or having their job and building it up on the side. That is not your story and not your path. So tell us a little bit about who you were before you started investing in real estate.
Before I started investing in real estate, I was building businesses in corporate America. Worked for the power company, started my career as a civil engineer, designing foundations for transmission structures. Those are really, really big towers that you see on the side of the road. And did that for a little bit, got on a leadership track and was tracking pretty quickly. I had a job opportunity based on a sponsor of mine and a mentor, and I moved into that role, and 2009 happened. And his position got eliminated, and I got stuck in that role for about 30 months, 27 days, and 23 hours or something like that.
You know exactly how long you were there.
So, eventually I got out of that role, and the new role allowed me to use the MBA that I had just finished up. But they told me if I didn't get a promotion in the next year, I was going to have my bonus cut and some other things which were going to happen, because basically the move that I made was a lateral from the position I was in, but it was a step back from the position I was in prior to taking that other role.
So you were navigating corporate culture and how that all works, and obviously you had a skill base with engineering background and things of that nature, but it was still kind of corporate world stuff.
Yeah, without question. And so, I decided to leave the power company and take my talents to a consulting firm, because that's what you do, right? You go from owner to the consultant back to the owner. And so I got the opportunity to start building an office for a small consulting firm, about 800 people. And a few months into that journey, the guy that I was working for asked me why I charged the admin budget. And I was like, because I wasn't working for any clients. And he said, well, you need to figure out how to charge a client. I said, but I don't have anything. I finished my project. And so that was a really tough conversation, because the next part of that conversation went something like, well, you will either charge a client or you'll take vacation next time. And I said, I won't steal from a client, and I don't own this place, so I'm not going to take vacation if I'm not billable for a week.
Yeah. So he was putting you in kind of a position to make choices that were beneficial to the business, but not necessarily beneficial to the client, and therefore beneficial to your reputation.
Right. And I knew that it was a slippery slope that I didn't want to go down, and I wasn't going to go down. So I gave them back their $10,000 signing bonus and went to a larger company and ended up with some global responsibilities related to power consulting and so on and so forth. And so that was pretty cool. I got to spend time overseas. But the part that sucked was I had to give up coaching high school football. I was doing that in the evenings after I would leave work.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly flying back into Richmond after being in the Midwest somewhere and flying over a football field and seeing the kids playing on a Friday night. I was just like, man, I sold my opportunity to have big impact for $600 a month. And that just, it wasn't worth it. I knew I had to get out of that bad situation, but I always talked about, well, I got a pay increase and all this other stuff. And so from there, I built a pretty strong reputation in the industry. And I got recruited to come to a construction company to do this first off project where we were doing everything end to end, securing real estate, doing the engineering for the equipment that we were putting in, and then actually doing the construction. And so I was employee number 2. We were able to grow that to about 175 employees and $20 million in revenue in the first year.
Wow. So that was was that kind of when you started to get to, I mean, obviously you just blew up a business, but that's also when you were starting to get to know the real estate side?
So I'd been investing with fix and flip investors along the way, doing some hard money loans. But no, I still hadn't really dug into the apartment world, which is where I decided to go. And so when I got to the end of that first year, we had about 30% in profit. And the reward for that was laying people off, right? I had to reduce the workforce by about 50%. And I was like, man, this doesn't make sense. I don't ever want to do this again.
So you're just learning over and over again that the businesses, the corporations are, not all corporations are bad, obviously, but, are working for their corporate selves, that is just kind of how the wheel turns in that world.
Yeah. I mean, profit is king. We return the money to shareholders. I mean, it was Fortune 500, so it's publicly traded, right? So you got to maximize the profits. And the easiest way to do that is usually with people. Right. So we did that. I promised myself I wouldn't do it again. And then November rolled around and I got the opportunity to do it again. I was like, I'm done. So I became a corporate America dropout at that point. And I started thinking, I was like, what am I going to do next? And I went back to sophomore year of college. My buddy Duran and I were sitting on the stoop and we were doing the math because that's what all good engineering students do in their free time. I was paying $395. I had 2 roommates paying $395. He had the same thing going on downstairs. And we multiplied it out across the complex. The guy was making $700,000 a year. We never seen him. We never talked to him. It's like, that's what we want to do. We don't want to go get a job, right? This is an amazing life that you can live. And so I was like, I need to go back and figure that out. I got some money in the bank. I got a credit score. I got some experience. I got some degrees and certifications. I should be somebody who can go accomplish this now. And so started digging into podcasts and YouTube and books and just trying to self-educate at that point.
Yeah, so you started building that clarity and you're like self-educating. And then there was a point where you just jumped, right? Specifically into multifamily, which I'm excited to get into the details of really how hard that is and open up for our listeners a little bit of your journey and what you've learned along the way. But you knew when you made this leap that you wanted to do multifamily for the exact reason you just described, right?
Yeah, I went back to what I figured out I wanted to do in college. I finished the engineering stuff, but I knew I was going to come back to real estate at some point.
So you just went and bought your first apartment, got a loan, big 100-unit place, right? No problem at all?
Yeah, right. That's not the real world. I went to 10 banks. They all told me no. I was like, what do you mean? I've got a professional engineering license. They're like, yeah, you don't have any experience. I said, I just built a $20 million business. You don't have any experience. I got an MBA. Like, what do you want? We want you to have signed a loan for a property of similar size, and we want you to have executed the business plan that you plan to execute with this property.
Yeah. So you knew what property you wanted even, right? You had searched out a property, and I want to get at your underwriting and how you figured that out a little bit, but let's just continue to tell this first story before we go there. Like, you knew your property, you went to all these people and tried to get a loan. No one would give you any money. And so what did you do?
I started fixing flipping houses. right? Because that's what every good investor does. Because, if you can't get a loan. But I only tell that part of the story because I was sitting on the stoop again, and a guy pulls up, right? The bank told me I needed to go get an experienced partner in order for them to give me a loan. And so a guy pulled up, he said, I want to check out the finishes in this property because we're doing one down the street. And during that tour, he said, I'm thinking about this building. And it was the exact same building I tried to buy 4 or 5 months ago by myself.
That's pretty like divine ordery type of thing. Just that like he shows up, that you're sitting on the porch, that he has the interest in, starts talking it through. That's crazy. Okay, so he's got a little experience and he's interested in the same place.
It's perfect, right? And I was like, oh man, you're the guy I've been looking for, right? Thinking it was the divine order and all this stuff. I was like, please don't leave me out. I want to get in the deal. He said, what are you going to bring? I said, I'm not sure. We can figure it out. Don't leave me out. Then he said, how much money are you going to bring? I said, I don't know. We'll figure it out. Don't leave me out. He said, he left me out. He went and made the offer. It didn't get accepted though. And he went and talked to a partner of mine and said, I need you to come into this deal and be the general contractor. And he said, oh, that's the one Jerome was talking about. I'm only doing it if he does it.
Awesome.
And so then I come back in the deal and get the great opportunity to be an asset manager on that project. And with me being an asset manager, there's a press release that comes out. And now I have experience. And now the banks want to talk to me.
Magically. Suddenly you have all this experience.
Yep.
Awesome. So you got in on that deal one way or another. And what I think is the important lesson from that, especially for folks who are trying to take the leap into full-time investing, is that if you're going to do multifamily, and correct me if you feel differently, Jerome, you really have to have partnerships in that process. Do you agree with that?
Without question. I mean, you're not going to be able to go do these deals alone. Well, there's some people who can, but what I can say is if you're going to do it with bank debt, it's going to be really difficult to do it without somebody who's already been down the path before. I liken it to a fraternity or a sorority. Somebody who's already in the club has to bring you in the club in order for you to get in the game.
Yeah. So if you're sitting on $1 million, you're just trying to figure out what to do with it. Maybe that's a different story. You can go out and fail by yourself. But none of us are that person. And so you've got to figure out how you're going to build the team around that type of investment. So who are some of the players, like for someone who doesn't know multifamily investment, who are some of the players in that team? And we're not talking about team like insurance agent and property manager necessarily or anything like that. We're talking about the team of people that's buying these properties together. Who are some of the players and the important parts of that?
I think every investor is trying to solve 4 things: knowledge, deal flow, experience, and capital. And one person can be responsible for all of them. One person can be responsible for one of them, or multiple people can be responsible for each of them, right? The knowledge piece is really important, and everybody in the deal should have some knowledge, right? So you can actually evaluate the asset. From there, you need deal flow. And the person who finds the deal is a person that actually has the leverage. And it's always interesting when somebody says, yeah, I found the deal. I'm like, where'd you get it? It was on LoopNet. You didn't really find a deal.
That doesn't really count.
Yeah, but they found the deal. Once you find the deal, you're going to need that experienced partner if you're going to get bank financing. And if you're not, and you just have a bunch of money, I still encourage you to have the experienced partner, because these things are bucking broncos, and you want to make sure that you got somebody who's tamed a bronco before, so that you don't spend a bunch of time wasting it and trying to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, learning the hard way doesn't make sense in multifamily, just because there's just a lot more zeros in your mistakes and your successes.
Yeah, and I mean, you can drive the thing in the ditch really quickly if you're not careful. They can get away from you. It's really scary. And then the last one, right, is capital. And I don't think multifamily is a poor man's game. There are people who will tell you that you can do it with no money, no credit, no cash. It's no problem. I don't feel that way. I think those deals end up going the wrong way, and they end up going the wrong way really fast. There are things that come up that you don't expect. And if you don't have any capital reserves, then I don't think people will be in a space where they can weather that storm. And the last thing you want to do is give the property back
right when
you've purchased it from somebody. It's just, you aren't actually keeping your commitment when you do stuff like that. And reputation is more important than money in this game, for sure.
So what's a play that someone makes, a mistaken play, as you describe it, where they're essentially investing in a multifamily with very limited capital? What's enticing them? Is it like they can get all the money from a bank, or it's they just have money? Like, where's the capital coming from for someone who doesn't have their own and is still somehow yet investing in multifamily?
So I think they are getting owner financing is usually how this works out. They use creative financing to get into the deal, and then they try to shoestring it until they get to a place where they can refinance it. But what happens in between close and a refinance of it is the actual execution of the business plan. And all the things that you didn't plan for show up after you close. They don't ever show up before. They show up after you close, and they usually cost money. And so if you don't have any money and you're trying to wrangle this multi-million-dollar asset, or even if it's several $100,000 asset, you're going to have to pay for something at some point. And if you don't have the money to renovate a unit or turn a unit when somebody moves out, or you need to buy appliances, like there's all these things that just pop up. And if you don't have some form of a cushion, you end up in trouble. I'm a perfect example of that. Had the bank given me the loan on that first property by myself, I would have been bankrupt, right? Because my construction budget went over, and I didn't have enough reserves. I didn't have enough loan. I didn't have enough access to capital to cover the shortfall. And so that was a function of, all the partners coming in and putting money together so that we could bridge that gap.
That makes so much sense. Okay, yeah. So the owner financing is the biggest way that you could think you have something, because you talk to seller into getting in a deal with you, and then just make that mistake, not have any capital, not be able to follow through with it, and end up, defaulting on your relationship with that owner and affecting your own, reputation and everything else. This episode of REI Clarity is brought to you by, wouldn't you know it, Shine Insurance. Shine Insurance is the #1 real estate specialist for investors in the Midwest. We work with real estate investors who have more than 10 units of single family, multifamily, and commercial real estate. At Shine, our process is simple, our policies are smart, and when you need us, we shine. So my quick insurance story for this episode really has to do with a claim. I have an investor who had a fire. What happened was the person who was the tenant was smoking on the front porch, fell asleep, lit the couch on fire, lit the front of the house on fire. No one was injured, which was awesome. But the house was really almost a total loss. We are now about $160,000 into a 1,200 square foot single family home. The investor has learned a lot about what happens with tenants when the property is not available, what happens with insurance companies as we walk through the process, and what it means to have an independent advisor, someone who can help you through the process, who can answer questions, who can advocate for you. There's a couple times that contractors just weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing, and I dug in and I said, look, this stuff needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. That was something that I could do to help, and I could do that with insurance companies, I can do that with contractors. I help folks in claims in all sorts of different ways. His property is almost back together, ready to rent out in a couple of months, and he will be back to whole. But it has been a wild 8 months of really getting that property back to being able to be occupied. So if you are an investor in the Midwest, and that means from North Carolina to Wisconsin, you have a portfolio larger than 10 units, and you believe that your insurance advisor should be an important part of your team. Maybe they aren't right now, but they can be. Shine is right for you. So take 10 minutes right now and go to shineinsurance.com and change the way you feel about insurance. So what do you think is the best role for someone coming into their first multifamily deal? Obviously, you just named 4 roles, right? Having the knowledge, having the deal flow, being able to find the deal, having some experience. That one's kind of out if it's your first deal, obviously. And then having capital. Where do you see the best way to come into multifamily investing when you haven't done it before?
You got to find the deal. being able to find the deal is your way in because you control what happens. And it's the thing that requires the least amount of capital because you can put a bunch of sweat in on the deal, doing the legwork, meeting the brokers, mailing people, calling people, networking. Like those are the things that actually generate the deal. And most experienced people don't actually want to spend the time doing that because it's not profit producing immediately. They don't want to actually do the marketing piece. And so I encourage people to spend a little bit of money to get some knowledge, curated content, and then use that content applied against the leads that they're able to drum up. And then when they find a deal, they want to share that with somebody who has experience because that is really valuable. Now they've added value to the equation.
I love it. So what you just said is so important. Step one for finding the deal is the best way to get it if you don't have the money and you don't have the experience. And the way to do that, because that was going to be my next question, is okay, what the magic question, how do you find the deal? But you answered it. You said, well, first you've got to get knowledge. And the best way to do that is curated content, having a coach, working with folks who can teach you how to do this work. You do that. And finding that information, however you find it, is key. And then going out and doing it, finding the leads, getting those connected. And when you find those leads, knowing who to share it with, knowing who the experienced person is that's sitting there ready to help you out, or maybe doesn't even know they're ready to help you out. But when you bring it to them, then you've got a connection, and then you grow it from there. Then you get your way into the fraternity, and you get to grow from there. Did I get that right?
Yeah, without question.
When you're looking at a property, can you talk a little bit about how you underwrite properties? How do you look at a property and know that it's good for what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the story on how I messed up, the big one, right? So I used to think, hey, I'll take the income from market rent, and then I'll subtract the expenses that the owner has had over the past year or past 2 years to get an idea of how the property is going to perform.
Makes sense.
It doesn't.
Tell me
why. I did that, and I just had these astronomical returns. I'm like, this is a no-brainer. We've got to go do this. And then I realized that the owner wasn't actually running the property and doing all the things that needed to be done. And so their expenses were extremely low, and I had this huge gap. And then, oh, by the way, what I thought I was going to get for market rent, I had vacancies, so I didn't actually get everything that I thought I was going to get from an income perspective. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a roundabout thing. But just really quick for your listeners, I've never really given this out outside of like our training. So what we do is we take the gross rent that was collected by the seller. Okay. Right. And so this isn't potential. This is what they actually collected over the last year. Okay. And then we multiply that by 0.6. And that gives us the best that property could have performed. And that gives you the net operating income. So that 0.6 is assuming that you have a 40% expense ratio. Yeah. And that 60% of the income is dropping down to the net operating income. And then from there, we will back into whatever we believe the actual note is going to be for the mortgage. Mm-hmm. And we divide the monthly note into the net operating income. And so if that number is over 1.4, then we think we've got something. Okay. Right? The other way that I've seen people do it, and we were talking about it last night, is you take the price per unit on your property and you multiply that by 0.0125. Some people talk about the 1% rule. Other people talk about the 2% rule. Right. This is my 1.25% rule. And so if you can get that in rent on a monthly basis, then you've got a property that's worth digging into deeper.
So that's kind of a surface look. Okay, the numbers look pretty good on the surface. And then obviously you're going to look at, it comes back to the mistake that you made in that one, is the numbers were almost the entire decision-making piece for you in that one that didn't work out as well. And there was a lot underneath the surface of those numbers that was problematic, right?
Yeah, so this all boils down to a math problem first. And then once you solve the math problem, the next question is there something that I can fix? Is there an expense that is high and I can do something about it? because you increase the value of the property by driving the net operating income. And the net operating income is a function of the income, right, or the expenses. And so can you reduce the expenses or can you increase the income? If you can create a spread, then that directly impacts how much a property is worth.
Absolutely. And if you can increase the income by some percentage, it also comes back on your investment real quick, if you're able to do that, right? So that helps with your investment, and then you can take it from there. So what you just said there, and I think listeners have heard in many, many episodes, it's like, do the math, whatever makes sense for you. There's 100 different ways to navigate the math, but make sure it makes sense for you. And then if the math works, dig into the heart of it a little bit, not making decisions based on your heart, because that doesn't tend to work out very well, but understanding what's underneath, what you can make better, how you can increase potentially the income in creative ways, how you can reduce the expenses, all those kinds of things. Is that about right?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think kind of our last topic, you are helping other investors grow. You've talked a little bit about some of the ins and outs of what you're doing in multifamily. What is it that brings you joy around helping other people do this work as well?
Yeah, so back to the fraternity and sorority analogy, right? I'm the son of a soldier and a stay-at-home mom. We didn't have wealthy people coming over to our house who own multi-million dollars worth of real estate. My dad come pick up the phone and say, hey, my kid's trying to buy an apartment. Will you show him the ropes? And so I want to create that opportunity for people because I don't want somebody to be in the same place that I was in, trying to figure out how they can get in and not know the true story, right? There's a lot of people who will tell you can do this or you can do that, and they're not actually telling the whole story because they want to sell you on a dream. And then once you get in and you start to realize that that dream isn't actually true in the frame that they gave you, it gets really, 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 really frustrating because many people are trying to build wealth, right? They're trying to create a lifestyle and opportunity for their family. And when you go down a path and you realize it's the wrong path, it's painful and hurtful. So majority of the stuff that I've been doing has been for two reasons. One, make sure people know what they're getting themselves into. And then two, to create doors for people to actually get to that, because a lot of the paths that I've seen people presented with aren't actually delivering those results for them. And as far as what I get out of it, right? As a kid, I realized that when other people succeed, it's possible for me. And so I never saw it as something to be jealous or envious about. It was like, oh, well, he did it, so I can do it too, right? Jeremy bought multi-million dollars in real estate. I can do it too. Like, I know Jeremy, he's not that far away from me. And so creating that environment, the fairy, the dream fairy is floating around. So maybe some of that pixie dust will fall off on my lap too.
I love that. I think that's great. And I think that, I see a lot of like podcast episode titles are an example of what you're talking about, where it's like, so-and-so went from $75 of money in the bank to $58 million in real estate to, in 3 months. And in some ways, I think people get led down the wrong path with some of these potential stories. I mean, if they're true stories, I guess that's awesome. That can happen, I suppose. I don't think that's how it happens for most people. And I think it can lead you down this idea that, well, hey, if I just go own or finance an apartment on my own, I'm going to make millions of dollars in 6 months. And I just don't think that's really how it works. And it sounds like you're really helping people to understand that and bringing them into that fraternity.
Yeah, I ask all the time on LinkedIn for examples of the people that have done these things, right? And people have a really, really hard time pointing to an example. And even if you dig into some of the podcast episodes, when you really peel back the onion, it's not actually true. And I'm not the most popular guy for saying these things, but I want people to actually spend their money on what they're trying to get and not some illusion of microwave success. Multifamily and real estate in general, but multifamily in particular, is very crockpot. It's not microwave.
Yeah.
You're going to pay some dues on the front end and get this thing right and learn and get some experience and partner with some people and grow some deep relationships. And then you'll bear the fruit of that labor it doesn't just happen at the snap of the finger, like you just turn on money. That's just not the reality.
That's just not how it works. I agree. And so what we talked about for most of this episode is how you can do it, and how it does work. And that is knowing what you're doing, getting some information, starting to look for deals, starting to work deals on paper and understand the numbers and think through all that stuff, and then know who you're going to get to help you, who you're going to get to bring in when you find that deal. And then it gets easier after that first one, and then the next one, and so on and so forth. And you make some mistake and you lose a little bit of money, but it's okay because you had something behind it. And then the snowball is flowing. And that's how growth works in most businesses, frankly, but certainly, in real estate investing as well. You're wearing a shirt, for those of us just listening on a podcast, that says, "I took the red pill." And I wonder if you'd describe a little bit what that means.
Yeah, so back in 2010, I was in a pretty rough spot. It was back when I was in that really bad job, and I guess the job wasn't bad, but I was having a poor experience in that job, and started doing a bunch of self-reflection, and I thought about my favorite movie, The Matrix, and I decided to question everything. It was a reinvention period for me. It was a redefining period for me, and I decided to become my own Neo and started retraining myself, and everything from questioning simple things like, why do you say bless you when somebody sneezes? And deciding that I wasn't going to do that anymore because I didn't really understand. I was only doing it because it was tradition. And so I've just been going down that path. And so I tell people that I exit the matrix, and I help other people figure out how to do the same thing as well.
So you really were self-reflecting on a human level, on a life level, on a whole picture level, on how you see the world based on tradition and whatever else. That's what you're talking about there, and analyzing yourself as a human. If you could go back to the person in 2010 who was about to jump and tell them anything that you know now that you didn't know then, what would you tell yourself?
I think at that point, I'd lost my dream. I didn't really understand that life was more than what was happening right then, and that whatever the challenge was, that you could get through it. I think we all go through these cycles where, you have summer, spring, fall, and winter. And when you go through that cold period, you go through that tough period, that harsh environment, that it's going to thaw. You just have to make it through that piece. And it's not going to be easy, but once you get through those challenges, then many things seem very minor. The level of problem or the level of stress that you can handle raises dramatically. And that's the only way that you can grow, is by being stressed and challenged.
I love that. So if someone wants to find you, maybe they want some coaching around real estate investing, maybe they just want to understand more of what you do, how can someone do so?
Yeah, MyersMethods.com is where they can go and get a free 4-step guide on how to get a multifamily investing, why we think joint ventures over syndications is the way to go. And it's probably counterintuitive for all the people who want to get rich quick. But, it's the process that I use every day in the business, right? And so the goal is to help people do that. And they'll get the opportunity to join our Facebook community. And we've got a weekly mastermind call that we do on Fridays at noon Eastern, where people can just bring their questions, challenges, issues, and we work through them. In addition to that, there's some curated content in the Facebook group, and there's also a 2-hour free training for joining the group and being a part of that community. So love the opportunity to meet some new people and hang out with them.
I love it. And one thing I didn't hear that I love that you're doing is the podcast Dreamcatchers. Is that the name of your podcast? I think that is really cool. I like the concept. I think that if folks haven't listened to Dreamcatchers yet, they should check that out as well.
Awesome. Oh man. And so because of COVID, we launched a new one, right? It's called Myers Methods Presents Multifamily Missteps. And it's peeling back the layers on the challenges and struggles and missteps that operators from all across the country have experienced. We've had people with 6,000 doors on the podcast. We've had a property manager that's doing 25,000 doors. And we've had people as small as a triplex. So, just touching all parts of the sphere of people investing in multifamily. But if you want to get the real deal, you're tired of HGTV podcasts, This is going to tell you some real stories, and they're good stories. I laugh all the time about them.
Sweet. I love it. Jay, it's so great to have you on the show, and I appreciate you taking half an hour out of your time to share with our listeners a little bit about your story and how they can take that leap into multifamily, into full-time financial freedom, into full-time investing that hopefully brings us to financial freedom. So thank you for being on the show.
Jeremy, this was awesome. Thank you.
Special thanks to Jay Myers for taking the time to share his insights with us. I'm really feeling inspired around multifamily, and more than anything else, around just understanding what it really takes to take that leap. You know, I always feel like in real estate investing, if you have the right numbers and you can figure everything out and you feel good about the deal, you can kind of just do it on your own. And I like to be sort of a solo person thinking I can do things on my own. And what I felt inspired about from Jay is that he understood that doing this particular work on your own, especially at the beginning, just doesn't make any sense. And that having a team, having a community of people, having smart investors with you is really, really key to success. And just that realization, that understanding made me feel like, hey, I know something a little bit more about multifamily investing and what it takes to get into it than I did before this episode. So I hope you feel the same way as well. Who do you know that needs to hear this podcast episode? Who is thinking about jumping into multifamily and could really hear what Jay has to say? Maybe they're thinking they can do it on their own and really need to hear his insights on the pitfalls of that type of step. Grab your phone and send them this episode. Let's help everyone level up. Still, we read every single review, so please do give us a 5-star rating and a thoughtful review. Tell us what you'd liked and what you want to hear next. And if you have not joined us in the REI Clarity Facebook group, when you're going to join Jay's group that he talked about at the end of this episode, please consider joining ours as well. It is a place to get clarity, to make connections, to implement the strategies and systems that we talk about here. Head over there, join us. We would love to have you. All right, until the next time, here's to clarity that leads to financial freedom faster.